This is the Music History In-Depth podcast for November 6th through the 12th. This week, a legendary top-selling album gets released, a trend-setting music video is filmed, and two Canadian music legends are born. This album is from a group that started off as the New Yardbirds. Here's what happened. In 1968, the Yardbirds were on their last legs. They played what they thought was their last gig in July and then realized that they still had a few concerts that they were contractually obligated to play in Sweden, Switzerland, Denmark, and the Netherlands. Half of the band was already on to the other projects that they were doing, so they authorized the remaining members to get new members, but to still use the name the Yardbirds when performing. Guitarist Jimmy Page and bassist Chris Dreja went looking for a lead singer and found one in Terry Reid. He said no, though, and said to try Robert Plant. Plant said yes, and since the group still needed a drummer, Plant brought John Bonham on board. Dreja then decided to quit to become a photographer, another Pete Best Award winner for leaving a band before it became popular. Dreja would, however, pop back up later in the band's story in a not-so-good way. Bassist John Paul Jones came to them and asked to join, so with that lineup in hand, off they went and did the final gigs as the New Yardbirds. Once they were done playing their original gigs, they decided to keep going as a group and record an album together. They recorded and mixed the album at Olympic Studios in London, England in October of 1968. The reason why it didn't take too long to record, according to Page, was that most of the songs had already been tested and rehearsed during the tour of Scandinavia. Page covered the costs of the studio, which may have been another reason why it only took 36 hours of studio time to record the album. Then, with album in hand, they went shopping for a record deal. They had the upper hand in negotiations, and they knew it completely. They negotiated a sweetheart of a deal with Atlantic Records that gave them copyright control and also control over every aspect of publicity. They released this album on January 12, 1969 to not-so-good reviews, actually, much like most albums that become classics. Also, like many classics, it didn't matter what the critics said about the album. To the public, they loved it. It became a huge hit. The critics would eventually come around. In fact, Rolling Stone magazine, who originally hated the album, eventually made it their 29th greatest album of all time. There was just one little problem: the band's name. They were going to go out on tour with the name The New Yardbirds, but received a cease and desist order from former member Chris Dreja. Told you he'd be back. The band would get their name, according to whichever legend you want to go with, from either Bob Dylan or members of The Who or whoever at this point, who said that the band would go over, quote, like a Led Zeppelin. Well, they were wrong. The album would go on to sell over 10 million copies and go top 10 in 5 different countries, including America. The album that had the now classics Good Times, Bad Times, Babe, I'm Gonna Leave You, Dazed and Confused, I Can't Quit You Baby, and Communication Breakdown was called Led Zeppelin 1. Led Zeppelin 2 was heavier, and according to the band, was when the group really started playing well. The mastermind behind the album this time around was Jimmy. He made sure that everybody stayed on track. The album was written and recorded while the band was on tour between April and August 1969. Robert Plant, in retrospect, wasn't too thrilled with that due to some of the recording studios that they were forced to record in while on tour. The album was released on October 22nd of that year, and the only officially released single from the album was the first song, Whole Lotta Love. That song, either its wailing guitar, thumping bass, Robert Plant's demanding vocals, all backed up by John Bonham's masterful drumming, set the tone for the rest of the album. The only problem with the song concerns the lyrics. Some of them were lifted/stolen from blues great Willie Dixon's song I Need Love. The group, of course, was sued and had to settle out of court on that one, which makes you wonder about their current problems with Stairway to Heaven and that plagiarism lawsuit, which I guess they finally put to rest, at least according to the Supreme Court a couple years ago. Even though Whole Lotta Love was the only released single, other songs from the album have made the lexicon of classic radio streaming services, of course. The Lemon song, Ramble On, and Moby Dick all get regular rotation on the radio these days. As far as the album went chart-wise, it did pretty well. Went top 10 in 11 different countries and number 1 in 7 of them, including America. When Led Zeppelin 3 came out, it performed okay, but the critics again were at best lukewarm to the album, much like Led Zeppelin 1 and 2. For the 4th album, though, they decided not to even call it Led Zeppelin 4. They simply put 4 symbols on the album cover. The guys decided to not do any more touring and to concentrate on recording. They went to the English countryside to a place called Headley Garage. They also took a mobile recording studio with them and got down to business with Jimmy Page back at the helm. The mobile studio was good for capturing ideas while they jammed together, and plus, there was no pub near the country studio, so they didn't have their usual distractions, many of them beer-related. The album had their customary 2 officially released singles. As with every Led Zeppelin album, all of the songs became hits. Black Dog was named after a black dog that used to hang around the studio and was the first single released. Rock and Roll was also released as a single and came out of one of those jam sessions that they were doing. The Battle of Evermore is based on the Scottish Independence Wars. Stairway to Heaven is also known as the DJ bathroom break song because of its length. It's also part of a lawsuit that was filed by another group named Spirit, who claimed that the beginning of the song was stolen from them, but like I said before, that lawsuit has since been dismissed by the United States Supreme Court only very recently. Misty Mountaintop is about cops, student protesters, and drug possession, and the title is based on J.R.R. Tolkien. Four Sticks is based on a drum pattern that John Bonham did. Going to California is about California earthquakes, actually. And When the Levee Breaks was actually first recorded way back in 1929. When Led Zeppelin 4 was released on November 8, 1971, it had already been delayed. The album was supposed to come out in April. Led Zeppelin 4 went straight to number 1 in America and top 10 in 8 countries. It has sold 16 million certified copies in America, making it one of the biggest selling albums of all time. There are 4 symbols on the album's cover representing the 4 band members. Some people just call it the 4 Symbols album. Most people, though, simply know it as Led Zeppelin 4, the iconic album that was released on November 8th, 1971. Before we go any further, we'd like to tell you about our other podcasts. The Music History Today podcast goes over the daily events in music history and drops daily, including weekends, on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts. There's also the Music Halls of Fame podcast, which talks about a member of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, along with other Music Halls of Fame's museums and walks of fame. The Music Halls of Fame podcast drops every Thursday and can also be found on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts. Now, back to this podcast. Back in the late 1960s, while in art school, young Farouk Bulsara became friends with bassist Tim Staffel, who was in a band called Smile. Farouk became a fan of the band and ended up joining them when Staffel left the band to form another band. Farouk joined the band and did 2 name changes. The first was that he persuaded the rest of the members of the band, guitarist Brian May and drummer Roger Taylor, to change their name from Smile to Queen. The second was that Farouk Bulsara changed his name to Freddie Mercury. Queen played with different bassists for a couple of years until they found the perfect bassist in John Deacon. In 1973, the band signed a record deal and released their debut album, Queen. The critics liked the progressive metal sound of the band, but the public didn't find the album, even with the now well-known lead single from that album, Keep Yourself Alive. Their second album, Queen 2, found success both with critics and the general public. That album had the classic Seven Seas of Rhye. In 1974, the band released Sheer Heart Attack, which gave them even bigger success with songs like Killer Queen, Now I'm Here, and Stone Cold Crazy. Album number 4 came around in 1975. A Night at the Opera became a worldwide smash. The album had the hits Love of My Life, You're My Best Friend, and another song that would chart top 10 3 different times in America. The second time with the help of a movie about 2 kids with a cable access TV show, and the third time with the help of an Academy Award-winning performance. According to historians, some of the ideas for the song Bohemian Rhapsody were formulated in the late 1960s, especially the beginning part where the singer of the song talks about the fact that he had just killed a man. The song, all planned out by Freddie beforehand, starts with a 49-second intro, then goes into an almost 2-minute ballad, then Brian May's 25-second guitar solo, then the 1-minute opera that everybody and their grandmother loved singing, and then a quick little 47-second rock portion, and it has a 1-minute ending. All totaled, it is a 5-minute and 55-second mini rock opera about a guy who accidentally killed a man, sold his soul to the devil, then calls God to help save him. That would be the opera portion in the center. The band started recording the song in late August 1975, and it took almost 3 weeks to record it. They had rehearsed it 3 weeks beforehand. They layered over 100 different tracks onto the song, but Brian May's guitar solo is all him, 1 track only. The music video itself was pretty important, as it turns out. The now famous music video for the song was filmed on November 10th, 1975. The band filmed it at Elstree Studios, which was where they were rehearsing for their upcoming tour. The video only cost £4,500 British pounds to make. According to music video director Bruce Gowers, the video only took 4 hours to shoot. Cameraman Barry Dodd and assistant director Jim McCutcheon did all of the special effects while they were shooting the video. Unlike in other videos, the effects were not done during editing. The music video was done so that the band didn't have to do the song on the popular British music show Top of the Pops, mainly because they knew that they couldn't do a lot of the singing parts live during that time period. The music video became a trendsetter as its success ushered in a new era of music videos, as many bands then started doing them soon thereafter. The record label, as you can imagine, was not exactly pleased with a 6-minute song when they heard it and then saw the music video for it. They thought that it did not fit into that cookie-cutter 4 minutes or less corporate radio world, so the band took the song to Capital Radio DJ Kenny Everett, who played it on air. He teased it up first by playing little snippets of it until the public wanted more. It then got picked up by other radio stations, and after that, Queen's record label Elektra released the song on October 31st, 1975, on good old Halloween. The song Bohemian Rhapsody became a huge hit, especially in England. In America, it went top 10. The song also sold over 6 million copies worldwide. The music video that was made for the song is also considered a template for how music videos were made back in the 1970s. The song has been popularized a few more times. The first was during the unfortunate early death of Freddie Mercury from complications from AIDS in 1991. The second was when a movie called Wayne's World, about 2 guys who had a cable access TV show, used the song in the now famous headbanging in the car scene. By the way, the song that was originally supposed to be used for that scene was Guns N' Roses' Welcome to the Jungle, but for some reason Guns N' Roses said no, so it went to Queen, which made Queen's Bohemian Rhapsody even more popular than before. Bad move on Guns N' Roses' part. The third time that Bohemian Rhapsody got popular was this past few years when the band's biopic Bohemian Rhapsody, with a Best Actor Academy Award-winning performance by Rami Malek as the late great Freddie Mercury, took the song back up to the top 10. The music video for the song that you cannot stop banging your head to, and also introduced a generation to an opera of sorts, Queen's Bohemian Rhapsody, filmed on November 10th, 1975. Our two birthdays this week both hail from the Great White North. This first Canadian artist was born on November 7th, 1943. She also moved to America in the 1960s. She is known as one of the greatest songwriters of all time. Her songs mix romance and longing with social, political, and environmental themes. Her album Blue is considered one of the greatest albums ever. In fact, NPR ranked it as the greatest album ever made by a woman. A big happy birthday to Miss Joni Mitchell, born November 7th, 1943. Our next Canadian is a jack of all trades. Neil Young was born on November 12th, 1945. He's been called the godfather of grunge because of the way he distorted his guitar sound. He's originally from Canada and was in a band with Rick James called the Minor Birds. Yeah, you heard that right. Rick James, the king of punk funk, and Neil Young, the godfather of grunge, were once in a band together. Let that one marinate in your brain for a little while. Anyway, James got arrested for being AWOL from the Navy Reserve. It was the 1960s after all, and the draft was in full swing, and he left the Navy Reserve and then got busted for leaving. So Neil quit the Minor Birds and moved to California in the mid-1960s. By the way, he came to the United States illegally until 1970 when he got his green card. Yes, Neil Young, the legendary Neil Young, was in a band with Rick James, the king of punk funk, and was also an illegal immigrant, at least for a good 5 years or so. Again, let that one marinate in your brain for a minute. Anyway, during that time, he formed the legendary group Buffalo Springfield with Stephen Stills. Neil would then go on to form his own band, Crazy Horse, before reteaming with Stephen Stills to form Crosby, Stills, Nash & Young. Neil still did albums with Crazy Horse, though. He released his first solo album, Neil Young, self-titled, in 1969. His next solo album, Everybody Knows This Is Nowhere, was released later in 1969 and is the first official album with Crazy Horse. Neil and Crazy Horse got together after a short tour to work on the next album. The next album was originally supposed to be the soundtrack for a movie written by Dean Stockwell called After the Gold Rush. The movie never got made, and the screenplay was supposedly lost for decades. No one seems to have known what happened to it. The group recorded for a little while at Sunset Sound Studio in Los Angeles, California, and managed to get 2 songs completed, Oh Lonesome Me and Believe in You. And then Neil decided that he wanted to go in a completely different direction, so he, in effect, fired the band. He shifted gears and went home to Topanga Canyon in California. There, he set up a small studio in his basement that could only fit a few people in it. He got his Crosby, Stills, Nash & Young bandmate, Stephen Stills, and the group's bassist, Greg Reeves. He also brought in Ralph Molina from Crazy Horse, along with a teenage guitarist known as Nils Lofgren. Nils would later go on to become a permanent member of Bruce Springsteen and the E Street Band. The group recorded songs like the new classic, Southern Man, After the Gold Rush, Cripple Creek Ferry, Don't Let Me Bring You Down, and Only Love Can Break Your Heart, which went to number 33 on the Billboard Singles Chart. When the album was finally released on September 19, 1970, it was received with mixed reactions. But of course, as with a lot of albums that the critics don't like, the public still loved it, taking it all the way up to number 8 on the Billboard Albums chart. Its reputation, of course, also grew over time to the point where now this album, called After the Gold Rush, is considered one of the greatest albums of all time. In 1971, Neil started an acoustic tour and had planned to do a live acoustic album to go with it. Fate, however, intervened. During the tour, Neil stopped off in Nashville to do a taping of the Johnny Cash TV show. During his time in Nashville, he received a call from Elliot Mazer, who owned Quadraphonic Sound Studios in the city. Mazer asked if Young wanted to use his studio to record the new material that Neil had been working on. Neil said sure, and went into the studio to record. Mazer got some country music studio musicians to sit in, along with Linda Ronstadt and James Taylor to do backup vocals, since both Ronstadt and Taylor were in town to tape their segments for Johnny Cash's TV show as well. Neil liked the results so much that he eventually went out on tour with the country musicians, now nicknamed the Stray Gators, and scrapped plans to do that live acoustic album. When Neil went back to California, he recorded some more songs in his barn there. He also had some recording sessions in New York City with Crosby, Stills, and Nash doing guest vocals, and with the London Symphony Orchestra participating on a couple of tracks as well. That finished album, called Harvest, was released on February 2nd, 1972. Among the tracks were an acoustic live version of Needle and the Damage Done, about artists who were dealing with heroin addiction, and was inspired by Crazy Horse member Danny Whitten, who was battling the addiction, along with songs Heart of Gold and Alabama, which inspired Leonard Skinner to record Sweet Home Alabama in response to what the band felt was an insult to the people of Alabama, and named Neil Young in the song. That would be verse number 2, if I'm not mistaken. Neil would go on to make other great albums like Rust Never Sleeps, Harvest Moon, Freedom, Ragged Glory, Long May You Run, and Mirror Ball with Pearl Jam. He's won at least 2 Grammy Awards, co-founded Farm Aid, and was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame twice, once as a solo artist and once with Buffalo Springfield. A big happy birthday to the man who keeps on rocking in the free world. At least free for a while, hopefully. Mr. Neil Young, born November 12th, 1945. And that is it for the Music History In-Depth podcast for November 6th through the 12th. Thank you for listening and or watching if you're on YouTube or Spotify.